"Don't turn on the TV, Mom," my daughter Karen said, her voice shaken like a leaf in a thunderstorm. And honey, the second those words left her lips, I knew my whole world was about to come crashing down around me like a house of cards in a tornado. Y'all, I've been living in this same little ranch house in Nashville, Tennessee for 43 years, raised 3 kids here, buried my husband from the front porch, and never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd see the day when my own daughter would be standing in my living room practically begging me not to watch the evening news in my own home. My name is Dorothy Henderson. I'm 72 years old, and I worked as a 3rd grade teacher at Hillwood Elementary for 38 years before I retired. Let me tell you something, sweetie. When you spent that many years dealing with 8-year-olds and their excuses for not turning in homework, you develop a pretty good radar for when someone's trying to pull the wool over your eyes. And honey, my daughter Karen was lying to me so hard I could practically see the desperation dripping off her like sweat on a July afternoon in Memphis. "What do you mean, don't turn on the TV?" I asked her, reaching for the remote control that's been sitting in the exact same spot on my coffee table for the past 15 years. "Karen, I watch Channel 4 News every single evening at 6 o'clock. Have since your father passed away in 2018. It's my routine, and you know how important routines are to people my age." But Karen lunged forward faster than a cat after a mouse and snatched that remote right out of my hands. Y'all, my own daughter grabbed the TV remote away from her 72-year-old mother like I was some kind of child who couldn't be trusted with the television. The disrespect of it all just took my breath clean away. "Mom, please," she said, and I could see those tears starting to well up in her eyes. "Just trust me on this one. You don't want to see what's on the news tonight. It's going to upset you, and you know how your blood pressure gets when you're stressed." Now, honey, let me tell you something about my blood pressure. It's been just fine for the past 5 years since I started taking my medication religiously every morning with my coffee and oatmeal. But Karen's always been one to use my health as an excuse to treat me like I'm made of glass instead of the strong Tennessee woman who raised her and her 2 brothers practically single-handedly after their daddy started drinking too much. "Dorothy Elizabeth Morrison," I said, using her full name the way I did when she was 7 years old and had broken my favorite vase trying to practice gymnastics in the house. "You give me that remote control right this instant. I am not some invalid who needs to be protected from the evening news. Good Lord, child, I lived through the Vietnam War, Watergate, 9/11, and the 2008 financial crisis. I think I can handle whatever Channel 4 has to report about Nashville today." But instead of handing over my remote, Karen started pacing around my living room like a caged animal at the Nashville Zoo. She kept running her hands through that blonde hair of hers, the same hair color she's been paying $200 every 6 weeks to maintain at that fancy salon in Green Hills, money that could be better spent on her children's college fund if you ask me, which nobody ever does. "Mom, there's something I need to tell you," she finally said, stopping right in front of my recliner, the same recliner where I've watched the news every evening for the past 24 years. "Something's happened, and I didn't want you to find out this way." Y'all, when your child starts a conversation with those words, you know in your heart that whatever's coming next is gonna hurt worse than stepping on a nail in your bare feet. I could feel my chest getting tight, not from my blood pressure, but from that mother's intuition that tells you when one of your babies is in trouble, no matter how old they get. Before I tell you what happened next, and honey, this part is going to absolutely shock you. If you're loving this story, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell. You know I get so excited when I see y'all in the comments. Speaking of which, what state are you calling home right now? Drop it down below. And sweetie, tell me, have you ever had family try to hide something from you that you had every right to know? because your stories help me know I'm not alone in this crazy world. Now, let me tell you what I discovered next, because what they did was about to backfire in the most beautiful way. Karen, you're scaring me, I said, and I could hear my voice getting smaller, the way it does when I'm trying not to cry. Just tell me what's wrong. Is it one of the boys? Is Michael okay? Is David hurt? No, Mom, the boys are fine, she said quickly. It's not about them. It's about the house. What about the house? I asked, looking around my living room with fresh eyes. Everything looked exactly the same as it always did. My wedding picture on the mantle next to Harold's purple heart from Korea, the Afghan my mother crocheted from my hope chest in 1969 draped over the back of the sofa, the collection of ceramic angels I've been adding to every Christmas for 30 years lined up on the windowsill. Karen took a deep breath that seemed to come from her toes. Mom, he's been taking care of some paperwork for you, legal stuff, and there's been a complication. Now, sweetie, let me pause right here and tell you about my son, David. He's 38 years old, works for some big accounting firm downtown, and about 2 years ago, he convinced me to let him help manage my finances. Mom, he said, you're getting older, and these financial things are getting so complicated. Let me help you. I'll make sure all your bills get paid on time, handle your taxes, maybe even find some better investments for Dad's life insurance money. It seemed like such a blessing at the time, y'all. Here was my successful son wanting to take care of his aging mother, making sure I wouldn't have to worry about money in my golden years. He had me sign some papers, power of attorney documents he called them, so he could handle my banking and pay my bills while I focused on enjoying my retirement. What kind of complication? I asked Karen. And honey, I could feel something cold and ugly starting to crawl up my spine like a spider. She said, there's been a mistake with the ownership papers. Not meeting my eyes. The house. There's a problem with the house, Mom. That's when I heard it, y'all. The sound that every homeowner dreads more than anything else in the world. The deep, rumbling growl of heavy machinery coming down my street. I looked toward my front window, the same window where I've watched 43 years of Nashville seasons change from spring dogwoods to summer heat to autumn maples to winter ice storms. Karen, I said slowly, what is that sound? Mom, please, she said, and now she was crying real tears. Don't look outside. David's handling it. He's talking to lawyers. It's going to be okay. But honey, you know I couldn't just sit there in my own living room and not look out my own window when it sounded like the whole street was being torn apart. I stood up from my recliner, the same recliner Harold saved up 6 months to buy me for our 25th wedding anniversary, and I walked to that window. What I saw outside made my knees buckle so hard I had to grab onto the windowsill to keep from falling down. There was a bulldozer in my front yard, y'all. A bright yellow bulldozer with Metro Nashville Demolition painted on the side in big black letters. And standing next to it was a man in a hard hat holding what looked like official papers, talking to another man in a suit.
Karen, I whispered because suddenly I couldn't find my voice. Karen, why is there a bulldozer in my yard? Mom, sit down, she said, trying to guide me back to my chair. Let me explain. But I couldn't sit down, sweetie. I was staring out my window at my front yard, the same yard where Harold planted those azalea bushes in 1982, where my grandkids learned to ride their bicycles, where I've raked 43 autumns worth of leaves. And there was a stranger with a bulldozer getting ready to destroy everything I'd spent my entire adult life building. The house is being demolished, I said, the words coming out like I was reading them from someone else's script. They're going to tear down my house. It's temporary, Karen said, quickly. David says it's temporary. There's been some kind of mix-up with the city permits, and they have to tear it down, but then they'll rebuild it exactly the same way. You'll get to come back. Y'all, I may be 72 years old, but I wasn't born yesterday. Nobody tears down a perfectly good house just to rebuild it exactly the same way. Nobody sends bulldozers to your front yard because of permit mix-ups. And nobody, and I mean nobody, looks as guilty as my daughter Karen looked standing in my living room unless something is very, very wrong. Where am I supposed to live while they're rebuilding my house? I asked. With me, she said. You'll come stay with me and Rob and the kids. It'll be fun, like a long sleepover. Honey, let me tell you about Karen's house in Brentwood. It's one of those modern McMansions with more bathrooms than bedrooms, sitting on a street where every house looks exactly the same and costs more than most people make in 5 years. Karen's been proud of that house ever since she married Rob, who sells medical equipment and thinks he's God's gift to suburbia because he drives a BMW and plays golf at the country club every weekend. The last time I stayed at Karen's house was during the ice storm of 2021, when the power was out here for 3 days. Those were the longest 3 days of my life, sweetie. Everything in that house is white. White carpets, white furniture, white walls. And her kids, bless their hearts, have been raised to believe that their grandmother is some kind of delicate antique who might break if they talk too loud or track mud through the house. Karen, I said, turning away from the window because I couldn't stand to watch that bulldozer sitting in my yard like a yellow monster waiting to devour my life. I need you to tell me the truth right now. What happened to my house? She started crying harder then, those big gulping sobs that reminded me of when she was 12 years old and had to tell me she'd lost her retainer on the playground. Mom, David was trying to help. He was trying to invest your money better, make it grow for your future. What does that have to do with bulldozers in my yard? I asked. He used the house as collateral, she whispered, for an investment opportunity. It was supposed to be guaranteed, Mom. He was going to make enough money to pay for your long-term care, maybe even get you that little condo down in Florida you always talked about. Y'all, I felt all the air leave my lungs at once. My son had gambled away my house, the house where I raised him, where I taught him to ride a bicycle and helped him with his algebra homework and celebrated every birthday and graduation and achievement of his entire life. He had used my home, my security, my memories, my foundation as a poker chip in some get-rich-quick scheme. The investment went bad? I asked, though I already knew the answer from the bulldozer outside. It wasn't David's fault, Karen said quickly. The company he invested with, they went bankrupt. Nobody could have predicted it. He lost everything, Mom. Dad's life insurance money, your savings, everything. I had to sit down then, honey, because my legs just gave out like they were made of jello instead of bone and muscle. I sank into Harold's old lazy boy, the chair he'd sat in every evening after work for 22 years before the cancer took him. The chair I'd kept exactly the way he left it because sometimes I still needed to feel close to him. How long have you known? I asked. About 6 months, Karen admitted, and her voice was so small I could barely hear it. David's been trying to fix it. He's been working with lawyers, trying to find a way to get the house back. That's why he didn't tell you. He didn't want to worry you until he could solve it. 6 months, y'all. For 6 months, my children had known that I was going to lose everything, and they decided I was too fragile, too old, too incompetent to be included in decisions about my own life. They'd let me water my azaleas and plan my summer garden and pick out new curtains for the kitchen, all while knowing that bulldozers were coming to tear it all down. The news, I said suddenly, remembering why Karen had taken away my remote control. What's on the news about my house? Karen's face went white as those expensive sheets she bought at Pottery Barn. There's a story about predatory lending practices targeting elderly residents, about how seniors are losing their homes to investment scams. Your house, our address, it's going to be on the news as an example. So not only was I losing my home, y'all, but my business was going to be spread across every television screen in Davidson County. Every person I had ever taught, every neighbor who'd watched me struggle through Harold's illness and death, every friend from church, they were all going to know that Dorothy Henderson had been too stupid to keep her own son from gambling away her house. That's when I heard the knock on the front door. Not a polite neighbor knock or a friend stopping by knock, but an official, authoritative knock that means business. We looked at each other, and I could see in her eyes that she knew exactly who it was going to be. "Mrs. Henderson," a man's voice called out through the door, "this is Jim Morrison from Channel 4 News. We'd like to speak with you about the situation with your property." Y'all, they had come to interview me. The news crew was at my front door, wanting to put my shame and my family's betrayal on television for everyone in Nashville to see. They wanted to make me the poster child for elderly financial abuse, the poor old lady who was too trusting and too naive to protect herself from her own son. "I'm not talking to them," I said firmly. "Karen, go tell them to leave." But when Karen opened the front door, I could see past her to my front yard. And honey, what I saw made my heart just about stop beating. There weren't just news crews out there. There were neighbors standing on the sidewalk, pointing at my house and talking in little groups. There were cars stopped in the street with people taking pictures on their phones. Mrs. Patterson from next door was standing in her driveway with her arms crossed, shaking her head like she was watching some kind of neighborhood scandal unfold. "Mrs. Henderson," the reporter called out, trying to see around Karen to get to me, "we understand you're a victim of elder financial abuse. Would you like to tell your story? Help other seniors avoid the same situation?" A victim. That's what I had become, y'all. In the span of one afternoon, I had gone from being Dorothy Henderson, retired teacher and independent woman, to a victim, someone to be pitied, studied, used as a cautionary tale. The transformation was so complete and so humiliating that I could feel something inside me just breaking apart like glass hitting concrete. "Tell them I have nothing to say," I said to Karen, but my voice was so quiet, she had to ask me to repeat myself. "My mother isn't giving interviews," Karen told the reporter and closed the door.
But I could still hear them out there, y'all. The reporter was talking to someone, probably getting comments from neighbors about what a tragedy it was, how terrible it must be for me, how this kind of thing happens to elderly people all the time. They were turning my life into a news story, my pain into entertainment, my family's betrayal into a public service announcement. I walked to the front window one more time and looked out at the scene in my yard. The bulldozer was still there, patient as a death sentence. The news crew was setting up their camera, probably planning to film the house while they talked about vulnerable seniors and financial predators. My neighbors were still standing around like they were watching a show, and Miss Patterson was now talking to someone on her cell phone, probably spreading the news to everyone else on our street who hadn't made it outside yet to see the spectacle for themselves. "Mom," Karen said softly, "we should pack some things, get you ready to come stay with us." Pack some things. Like I was going on vacation instead of being evicted from the only home I'd known for 4 decades. Like I could just throw some clothes in a suitcase and walk away from every memory I'd made since 1981. Every improvement Harold and I had scraped together the money to make. Every moment of joy and sorrow these walls had witnessed. "What about Harold's workshop?" I asked. "All his tools are still in the garage. His father's toolbox, the one he brought back from Korea?" Karen's face crumpled. "Mom, We can't save everything. There's not enough time. What about my mother's china? The set she gave me for my wedding? We'll take what we can fit in the car. What about Harold's clothes? I know it sounds silly, but I still have some of his shirts in the closet. Sometimes I hold them when I miss him. Mom, Karen said, and I could see her struggling not to break down completely. I'm so sorry about all of this. That's when it hit me, y'all. The full weight of what was happening, what had been done to me, what I was losing. I wasn't just losing a house. I was losing the last physical connection to my husband, to my children's childhood, to the life I'd built one careful decision at a time over more than 40 years. I was losing the place where Harold proposed to me in the living room because he was too nervous to take me somewhere fancy. I was losing the kitchen where I'd cooked 10,000 meals, the bedroom where I'd rocked 3 babies to sleep, the back porch where Harold and I had planned our retirement dreams. But more than that, sweetie, I was losing my independence, my dignity, the right to make decisions about my own life. Karen was already talking about me staying with them like it was a done deal, like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person with choices to make. And somewhere out there, my son David was probably in some lawyer's office trying to explain to his mother that he destroyed her entire life while trying to help her. The phone started ringing then. That old landline phone I've had since 1995, because I've never seen the point in paying for a cell phone when I spend most of my time at home anyway. Karen looked at me like she was asking permission to answer it, and I just nodded, because honestly, honey, how much worse could this day possibly get? Henderson residence, Karen said, and then her face went even whiter than before. Yes, she's here, but she's not. What do you mean, more reporters? How many? Y'all, apparently word was spreading faster than wildfire in a drought. Channel 2, Channel 5, the Nashville Scene, even some blogger who covered elder rights issues. They were all headed to my house to get the story about the retired teacher who lost everything to her own son's investment scheme. My quiet little street in Nashville was about to become ground zero for a media circus, and I was going to be the main attraction whether I wanted to be or not. We need to leave, Karen said, hanging up the phone. Mom, we need to get out of here before it gets crazy. This is my house, I said, and honey, I could hear my voice getting stronger, like some part of me was finally waking up from the shock. This is my home, Karen. I'm not running away from my own home. It's not your home anymore, Mom, she said gently. Legally, it belongs to the bank now. We're technically trespassing. Trespassing in my own house, in the place where I paid every mortgage payment on time for 25 years, where I maintained every system and repaired every problem and improved every room. I was a trespasser in the home where I lived longer than anywhere else in my entire life. That's when I heard the second bulldozer, y'all. The deep rumble of another piece of heavy machinery coming down Maple Street, probably to park next to the first one, like they were getting ready for a demolition party. I looked out the window again, and this time I saw something that made my blood pressure spike higher than it had been in years. There was David, my son David, standing next to a man in an expensive suit, both of them looking at my house like it was already gone. He had his hands in his pockets and his head down, the same posture he had when he was 8 years old and had been caught stealing candy from the grocery store. But he was here, y'all. He was here watching them prepare to destroy my home, and he hadn't even had the courage to come inside and face me. Karen, I said, my voice sharp enough to cut glass, is that your brother out there? She looked where I pointed and closed her eyes like she was praying for strength. Yes, ma'am. How long has he been out there?" "I don't know, Mom. He called me this morning and told me what was happening. He asked me to come talk to you first to prepare you before this." So David had known exactly when the bulldozers were coming. He planned this whole thing, sending Karen to break the news, trying to keep me from seeing it on television, timing everything so that I'd be presented with a fait accompli rather than having any say in what happened to my own property. "I want to talk to him," I said. "Mom, maybe that's not the best idea right now. Everyone's emotions are running high and—" "Karen Elizabeth Morrison," I said, using that full name voice that had been stopping children in their tracks for 38 years of teaching. "You march yourself outside right now and tell your brother that his mother wants to see him. And honey, you tell him that if he doesn't get his behind in this house in the next 5 minutes, he's going to regret it for the rest of his natural life." Y'all, I may have been 72 years old, and I may have just lost everything I owned, but I was still David Henderson's mother. I had changed his diapers, taught him to tie his shoes, helped him with his homework, and celebrated every success of his life. And now I was going to look him in the eye and ask him how he could have done this to me. Karen went outside, and through the window, I watched her walk over to David and the man in the suit. I could see her talking, gesturing toward the house, and then David looked up at my front window. Our eyes met across 40 feet of the yard where he used to play catch with his father. And sweetie, I saw something in his face that I'd never seen before. Shame so deep it looked like physical pain. But he started walking toward the house, and the man in the suit followed him. Within a few minutes, my living room was going to be filled with the people who had decided my fate without consulting me, and I was finally going to get some answers about how my life had fallen apart while I was busy living it.
The front door opened, and David walked in first. He's 38 years old now, but standing in my living room with his shoulders hunched and his eyes on the floor, he looked exactly like he did when he was 10 years old and had broken the neighbor's window with a baseball. Behind him came the man in the suit, who looked like every lawyer or banker I'd ever seen in a movie. Polished, professional, and completely uncomfortable with the human messiness of the situation. "Hi, Mom," David said quietly. "Don't you hi, Mom, me," I said, and honey, I could feel 38 years of motherhood rising up in my chest like a tidal wave. "You sit yourself down in that chair and you tell me exactly what you've done." David sat in Harold's chair, which somehow made everything worse. The idea that he would sit in his father's chair after gambling away his father's house, after destroying everything his father had worked for, it was almost more than I could bear. "Mrs. Henderson," the man in the suit said, "I'm Robert Walsh, Mr. Henderson's attorney. I want you to know that we've been working around the clock to find a solution to this situation." "What situation?" I asked. "You mean the situation where my son stole my house?" "Mom, I didn't steal anything," David said quickly. "I was trying to help. There was this investment opportunity, and the returns were supposed to be guaranteed. I thought I could make enough money to secure your future, maybe even buy you that retirement community condo you mentioned, with my house as collateral. It was supposed to be temporary. The investment was only for 6 months. The returns were supposed to be 18% annually guaranteed by the company's insurance policy. I had all the documentation, all the legal protections. On paper, it was completely safe. Y'all, I may be a retired elementary school teacher, but I'm not stupid. I know that when something sounds too good to be true, it usually is. And I know that you don't gamble with someone else's security, especially not your mother's home, no matter how good the odds look on paper. "David," I said, "did you ask me if I wanted you to risk my house?" "No, ma'am. Did you think I might want to have a say in whether my home, the home where I raised you, the home your father and I bought together, should be used as collateral for some investment scheme? I thought if it worked, you'd be happy about the results. And if it didn't work, I'd find a way to fix it before you ever had to know. But you couldn't fix it. No, ma'am. The company filed for bankruptcy 3 months ago. All the investors lost everything. There was no insurance policy, no guarantees. The whole thing was... He stopped and looked at his hands. Was what, David? A scam, Mom. It was all a scam. The lawyer, Mr. Walsh, cleared his throat. Mrs. Henderson, we've explored every legal avenue. We filed complaints with the SEC. We've tried to trace the company's assets. We've even hired a private investigator. But the money is gone, and the house was legally collateralized through the power of attorney documents you signed. So there's nothing that can be done. I'm afraid not. The bank has been more than patient. They gave us an extra 60 days to try to find a solution, but the demolition order was filed 3 weeks ago. That's when the reality of it all finally sunk in completely, y'all. This wasn't some nightmare I was going to wake up from. This wasn't some mistake that could be corrected with the right phone call or the right paperwork. My house was going to be destroyed. My possessions were going to be lost, and my life as an independent woman was over. But you know what? As I sat there in my living room looking at my son who had betrayed me, and the lawyer who couldn't help me, and my daughter who had tried to protect me from the truth, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. I felt angry, not sad, not defeated, not overwhelmed, just purely, cleanly angry. Get out, I said quietly. Mom? David looked up at me like he wasn't sure he had heard correctly. I said, get out, both of you. I looked at the lawyer, Mr. Walsh. Get out of my house. Mrs. Henderson, we really need to discuss the timeline for... Mr. Walsh, I said, standing up from my chair and using the voice I'd used to control classrooms full of third graders for nearly 38 decades. This house may belong to your bank now, but I'm still living in it, and I want you to leave. He looked at David, who nodded miserably, and then they both headed for the door. But David stopped at the threshold and turned back. Mom, I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I never meant for this to happen. I was trying to take care of you. David and Sweetie, I could feel my voice breaking just a little bit. You want to know the truth? I didn't need taking care of. I needed honoring. I needed respecting. I needed you to believe that I was smart enough and strong enough to be part of decisions about my own life. Instead, you decided I was too old and too fragile to handle the truth. And now look where we are. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something else, but I held up my hand. Go, I said. Just go. After they left, Karen and I sat in my living room in silence for a long time. Outside, I could hear more cars arriving, more people talking, more machinery rumbling. The circus was growing, and I was still the main attraction. Mom, Karen said finally, what do you want to do? And you know what, y'all? That was the first time all day that anyone had asked me what I wanted. Not what was best for me, not what they thought I could handle, not what was most convenient for everyone else, what I actually wanted. I want to see it, I said. See what? I want to see myself on the news. I want to know what they're saying about me, about this situation. I want to see how they're telling my story. Karen was uncertain. Are you sure? It might be upsetting. Honey, I said, reaching for the remote control she'd set on the coffee table, I've been upset all day. A little more isn't going to kill me. I turned on Channel 4 just in time to catch the beginning of the 6 o'clock news. The anchor, a young woman who looked like she was barely old enough to have graduated from college, was sitting behind the news desk with a concerned expression on her face. Our top story tonight involves what authorities are calling a growing trend of financial elder abuse. We're live now with Jim Morrison, who's been investigating the case of a Nashville woman who lost her home to what appears to be an investment scam. Jim, the screen cut to my front yard, y'all. There was my house, looking smaller and shabbier than I remembered, with those yellow bulldozers parked like threats on my grass. The reporter, a man about David's age, was standing on my sidewalk with a microphone in his hand. Thanks, Sharon. I'm here on Maple Street in Nashville, where 72-year-old Dorothy Henderson is about to lose the home she's lived in for more than 4 decades. Mrs. Henderson's son, acting under power of attorney, used her home as collateral for what turned out to be a fraudulent investment scheme. They showed a picture of me then, honey. I don't know where they got it, but it was an old photo from the church directory taken about 3 years ago. I looked so much older than I felt, so much more vulnerable than I thought of myself. They had turned me into exactly what they needed for their story, a frail, elderly woman who needed protection from predators.
Mrs. Henderson worked as an elementary school teacher for 38 years, the reporter continued, and neighbors describe her as an independent, intelligent woman who maintained her own home and finances until recently. But like many seniors, she trusted family members to help manage her affairs as she aged. The camera panned across my front yard, showing the azalea bushes Harold planted, the mailbox I painted last spring, the front steps where I'd sat with my coffee every morning for years. It was strange seeing my life presented like evidence in a crime scene. The investment company, Pinnacle Growth Solutions, promised guaranteed returns of 18% annually, targeting retirees with promises of financial security. But the company was essentially a Ponzi scheme, taking new investors' money to pay fake returns to existing clients. They showed some kind of official document then, probably from the SEC investigation, but what caught my attention was what the reporter said next. What makes this case particularly troubling is that Mrs. Henderson's son had no idea he was participating in a scam. David Henderson, a certified public accountant with a major Nashville firm, believed he was making a smart investment for his mother's future. Instead, he became another victim of sophisticated financial fraud. Y'all, they were making David sound like a victim too, like he hadn't made the choice to gamble with my house, like he hadn't decided to keep me in the dark about risks to my own security. They were turning him into another casualty of the scam, rather than the person who had chosen to put my home at risk without my knowledge or consent. We attempted to speak with Mrs. Henderson today, but she declined to comment. Neighbors say she's devastated by the situation and has been staying inside since learning about the demolition order. Staying inside, like I was hiding, like I was ashamed, like I was too broken by what happened to face the world. The anger I'd felt earlier started burning hotter in my chest, and I realized something important. They were telling my story wrong. "Karen," I said, "I'm going outside." "Mom, no, the reporters are still out there. You don't want to—" "You're right," I said, standing up and smoothing down my hair. "I don't want to hide in my house while strangers tell everyone in Nashville who I am and what happened to me. I want to tell my own story." And that's exactly what I did, y'all. I walked right out my front door, past the bulldozers and the news crews and all my neighbors standing around watching the show. I walked up to that young reporter with his microphone and his pre-written story about the poor elderly victim. "Excuse me," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm Dorothy Henderson. I believe you wanted to speak with me." The reporter's eyes got wide, and he gestured frantically to his camera operator. "Mrs. Henderson, yes, thank you so much for coming out. I know this must be a difficult time for you." "It certainly is," I said, looking directly into the camera. "But not for the reasons you think." The reporter looked confused, like this wasn't going according to his script. "Mrs. Henderson, can you tell our viewers how you're feeling about losing your home?" "Young man," I said, and honey, I could feel that teacher voice coming out strong and clear. "I'm not just losing my home. I'm losing my independence, my dignity, and the right to make decisions about my own life. But the real tragedy here isn't that I trusted the wrong investment company. It's that my own son didn't trust me enough to include me in decisions about my own property." Y'all, I could see Karen behind the camera making frantic gestures for me to stop talking, but I was just getting started. For the first time all day, I was in control of my own narrative, and I wasn't about to waste the opportunity. "You see," I continued, looking right into that camera lens like I was talking to each viewer personally. "Everyone keeps calling me a victim. Poor Dorothy, too old to understand finances, too fragile to handle the truth. But I taught third grade for 38 years. I balanced budgets, managed classroom resources, and made thousands of decisions every single day. I wasn't too old or too stupid to understand risk. I just didn't get the chance." The reporter was scrambling now, trying to regain control of the interview. "But, Mrs. Henderson, your son was trying to help secure your financial future." "My son," I interrupted, and sweetie, I let all that anger and disappointment ring clear in my voice. "Used my home as collateral without my permission. He signed papers on my behalf, made investment decisions with my property, and then kept me in the dark for 6 months while he tried to fix it. If a stranger had done that, we'd call it fraud. But because he's family, we're supposed to call it love?" Y'all, I could see people in the crowd starting to murmur, neighbors nodding their heads. Mrs. Patterson was looking at me with something like respect for the first time in 20 years. Even the bulldozer operators had stopped what they were doing to listen. "The real story here," I said, turning back to the camera, "isn't about investment scams targeting the elderly. It's about how we treat older people in this country, how we assume that once you hit a certain age, you're not capable of making your own choices anymore. How families make decisions for our own good without consulting us, and then act surprised when those decisions destroy our lives. Mrs. Henderson, what would you say to other seniors who might be facing similar situations?" "I'd say don't let anyone convince you that you're too old to understand your own business. Don't sign papers you haven't read. Don't give anyone power of attorney unless you absolutely have to. And don't let your children treat you like a child just because they think they know what's best for you." I paused and looked around at all the faces watching me. Neighbors, reporters, strangers who had stopped their cars to see what was happening. They were all listening, really listening. And I realized this might be the most important lesson I'd ever taught. And to the families out there, if you love someone, you respect them. You include them in decisions that affect their lives. You don't protect them from the truth. You trust them to handle it with the same strength that got them this far in life. The reporter looked like he wanted to ask more questions, but I held up my hand. "That's all I have to say," I said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some packing to do." I turned around and walked back toward my house, past Karen, who was staring at me with her mouth open, past the neighbors who were applauding, actually applauding, y'all, and back to my front door. But before I went inside, I turned around one more time. "Oh, and one more thing," I called out loud, enough for everyone to hear. "David Henderson, if you're watching this, you come see your mother. We need to have a conversation." Inside the house, Karen was right behind me, looking like she'd just watched me perform a magic trick. "Mom, that was amazing." "No, honey," I said, sitting back down in Harold's chair. "That was overdue." About 20 minutes later, there was another knock on the door, but this time it wasn't reporters or lawyers or strangers. It was David, looking like he'd been crying, holding a box of tissues and a cup of coffee from the Starbucks down the street. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "I saw the news." "Did you now?" I said, not making it easy for him. "Can I come in? Can we talk?"
I looked at my son, really looked at him for the first time all day. He looked older than 38, worn down by guilt and stress and the weight of what he'd done. But more than that, he looked like he was finally ready to have an honest conversation instead of trying to manage me. "Yes," I said, "we can talk." He sat down on the sofa, the same sofa where I'd read him bedtime stories and helped him with his homework and celebrated his graduation from college. The distance between us felt like miles. "Mom, I know I messed up," he started. "I know saying I'm sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need you to understand why I did it." "I'm listening." "When Dad died, and I saw how hard it was for you financially, the funeral expenses, the medical bills, trying to maintain this house on your teacher's pension, I kept thinking about what would happen if you needed long-term care, or if something happened to the house, or if your health got worse. The numbers just didn't add up, Mom. Your savings wouldn't have lasted 5 years if you'd needed assisted living." I let him talk, even though hearing him discuss my finances like I wasn't capable of understanding them myself made my blood pressure spike again. "I thought if I could just grow your money a little bit, make it stretch further, you'd have real security. You'd never have to worry about being a burden on us kids, or having to move somewhere you didn't want to go. And the investment looks so solid, Mom. I had lawyers review the contracts. I did due diligence. It wasn't supposed to be a gamble." "But it was a gamble," I said quietly. "And it wasn't your gamble to make." "I know that now." His voice broke a little. "I know I should have talked to you first. I know I should have respected your right to make your own decisions, even if I thought they were wrong. I just wanted to fix everything for you." Y'all, I could see that he meant it. I could see that in his mind, he'd been trying to be a good son, trying to take care of his mother the way he thought his father would have wanted him to. But good intentions don't rebuild houses or restore trust. "David," I said, "what would have happened if I had said no? If you had asked me first and I had said I didn't want to risk the house?" He was quiet for a long moment, and I had my answer. "That's the problem, son," I said gently. "Somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as your mother and started seeing me as your responsibility. You stopped trusting my judgment and started thinking you knew better than I did about my own life." "But Mom, you're 72 years old. Dad's been gone for 6 years. I just wanted to make sure you were protected." "Protected from what? From making my own mistakes? From living my own life on my own terms? David, I survived the Depression as a child, raised 3 kids mostly by myself while your father was working 2 jobs, taught school for nearly 40 years, and took care of Harold for 18 months of cancer treatments. What exactly made you think I couldn't handle my own finances?" He was crying now, real tears that reminded me of when he was little and had disappointed me. But this wasn't about a broken window or a bad report card.
This was about the fundamental lack of respect that had led to the destruction of everything I had built. "I don't know how to fix this, Mom," he whispered. "I've ruined everything." "You're right," I said. "You have. But David, the house was just a house. What you really ruined was my trust. And honey, that's going to be a lot harder to rebuild than any building." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds outside, the bulldozers being repositioned, reporters doing follow-up stories, neighbors still talking about what had happened. My quiet little street had been turned into a media circus, and at the center of it all was the destruction of my family's foundation. But you know what, y'all? Sitting there with my son, finally having the honest conversation we should have had 6 months ago, I realized something important. I wasn't the same person who had woken up that morning. The Dorothy Henderson who had trusted her son to handle her affairs without question, who had been willing to let her children make decisions for her own good, who had been afraid to speak up for herself, that woman was gone. In her place was someone I was just getting to know. Someone who had stood up to reporters and bulldozers and family members who thought they knew better. Someone who had looked into a television camera and told the whole city of Nashville that she refused to be treated like a victim. "David," I said finally, "I want you to do something for me." "Anything, Mom, whatever you need." "I want you to promise me that from now on, you'll treat me like the intelligent adult I am. No more managing me, no more protecting me from information I have a right to know, no more making decisions about my life without consulting me. I promise. And I want you to help me figure out what comes next. Not what you think is best for me, not what's most convenient for everyone else, but what I actually want to do with whatever's left of my life." He nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "What do you want to do, Mom?" And you know what? For the first time in a long time, someone was asking me what I wanted instead of telling me what I needed. It felt like coming back to life after being buried alive. "First," I said, "I want to go through this house and decide what I'm taking with me and what I'm leaving behind. And I want to do it myself, without anyone telling me what's practical or reasonable or worth saving." "Okay." "Second, I want to find my own place to live. Not with Karen, not in some retirement community you kids think is appropriate, but somewhere I choose for myself." "But Mom, the cost." I held up my hand. "David, what did I just ask you to promise me?" He stopped talking and nodded. "Third," I continued, "I want to know everything about the investigation, about the bankruptcy proceedings, about what happened to the other people who lost money to this company. I want to understand exactly how this all went wrong, not so I can blame anyone, but so I can make informed decisions about what happens next. I can get you copies of all the legal documents, all the correspondence with the lawyers and the SEC. Good. And fourth, I want your word that you'll never, ever use my age or my health or your concern for my well-being as an excuse to treat me like I'm incompetent. Because, David, if you do that again, you'll lose me completely. Not just my house or my money, you'll lose me." The weight of that threat settled between us like a stone. David had already cost me my home, my savings, and my sense of security. But he hadn't lost me yet, and I wanted him to understand how close he had come. "I understand, Mom," he said quietly. "I give you my word." Just then, Karen came back into the room, carrying 2 cups of tea and looking like she had been crying too. "Mom, I just got off the phone with Rob. We've been talking about the guest room situation, and we want you to know that you can stay with us as long as you need to. There's no pressure to find your own place right away." It was a kind offer, and I knew Karen meant it sincerely. But honey, after what I'd been through that day, the last thing I wanted was to become a permanent house guest in someone else's life.
Karen, that's very generous, I said. But I think a hotel might be better for now, just while I figure out what I want to do. A hotel? David looked alarmed. Mom, that'll be expensive and lonely, and I looked at him with raised eyebrows. I mean, he corrected himself quickly. If that's what you want to do, I'll help you find somewhere nice. Thank you, I said. That would be helpful. Karen set down the tea and sat on the arm of Harold's chair. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. When you were out there talking to the reporters, you seemed so strong, so confident. I haven't seen you like that in a long time. Y'all, that made me stop and think. When was the last time I'd felt truly confident about something? When was the last time I'd spoken up for myself instead of just going along with what other people thought was best? You know what, honey? I think I forgot for a while that I was strong. I got so used to letting other people take care of things, make decisions, solve problems, that I started believing I couldn't do it myself anymore. But you can, Karen said. You proved that today. Yes, I said, and I could feel something settling into place in my chest, something that felt like coming home to myself. Over the next few hours, the three of us worked together to pack up the things I wanted to save from the house. Not everything, there wasn't time or space for everything, but the items that mattered most. Harold's purple heart and his father's toolbox from Korea, my mother's china and the wedding album, the Afghan from my hope chest, and a few of Harold's shirts that still smelled like him. But more than that, I packed up some new understanding about myself and my family. David helped me wrap dishes and fold clothes, and with every item we handled, we talked a little more about what had gone wrong and how we could do better. Karen made lists and labeled boxes, and slowly the guilt and defensiveness started giving way to something that felt more like honest communication. By 10 o'clock that evening, my car was loaded with boxes and suitcases, and David had made reservations for me at a nice extended stay hotel downtown. Karen had packed me a cooler with food and drinks, and both of them had promised to check on me every day until I figured out my next move. But before I left, I wanted to do one more thing. I walked through the house one final time, room by room, saying goodbye to 43 years of memories. The kitchen where I'd cooked Christmas dinners and birthday cakes and comfort food after Harold's diagnosis. The living room where we'd watch TV together every evening and where I'd rocked babies and read bedtime stories. The bedroom where Harold and I had shared our dreams and our fears and our quiet morning conversations. In the back bedroom that used to be David's, I found something I'd forgotten about. A wooden box on the closet shelf filled with report cards and school pictures and little handmade Mother's Day cards from all three of my children. Cards that said things like, "My mom is the best because she helps me with everything," and "I love my mom because she's so smart and pretty." Y'all, those children had loved me for being smart and capable and helpful. When had that changed? When had I become someone who needed to be protected and managed instead of respected and consulted? I took the box with me. At the hotel that night, I sat on the bed in my temporary room and thought about everything that had happened. I'd lost my house, most of my possessions, and probably a good chunk of my retirement savings. My son had betrayed my trust, my daughter had tried to shelter me from the truth, and my private business had been broadcast on the evening news for all of Nashville to see. But I'd also found something I thought I'd lost forever. My own voice, my own strength, my own right to be treated like the competent adult I'd always been. The next morning, I woke up early and made myself a cup of coffee in the little kitchenette. I sat by the window looking out at the city where I'd lived my entire adult life, and I started making plans, real plans, based on what I wanted rather than what other people thought was best for me. First, I was going to find an apartment,
Nothing fancy, but something that was mine, chosen by me, paid for with my own money. Second, I was going to volunteer somewhere, maybe at a literacy center or a senior advocacy organization, somewhere I could use my teaching skills to help other people. And third, I was going to learn everything I could about financial planning and elder rights, so I'd never again be vulnerable to someone else's well-intentioned but disastrous decisions. And fourth, I was going to rebuild my relationship with my children on new terms, terms that respected my autonomy and my intelligence and my right to make my own mistakes. It wasn't going to be easy, y'all. Starting over at 72 is no joke, especially when you're doing it with limited resources and a family that's still learning how to treat you like an equal instead of a responsibility. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was in charge of my own life again. About a week later, I was settling into my new apartment, a nice one-bedroom place downtown within walking distance of the library and several restaurants. David came by for a visit. He brought Chinese takeout and a folder of documents about the bankruptcy proceedings. Mom, I've been thinking about what you said about treating you like the intelligent adult you are. Oh? I think I need to start over with how I see you, not as my elderly mother who needs protection, but as Dorothy Henderson, the woman who raised 3 kids and taught hundreds of students and survived everything life threw at her. It was a good start, honey. Not perfect, but a good start. I'd like that, I said. But David, it's going to take time. Trust isn't something you can just decide to rebuild. It's something you earn back one honest conversation at a time. He know, and I'm willing to do the work, however long it takes. Over the following months, that's exactly what we did. David would come by every Sunday for dinner, and instead of trying to manage my life or solve my problems, he would just spend time with me. We talked about his work and my volunteer activities and the books we were reading. Slowly, carefully, we started rebuilding the relationship between us. Karen came by too, usually with the grandkids, and gradually she stopped treating me like I was made of glass. The kids loved my new apartment, especially because I let them help me decorate and didn't worry about them making noise or messing up my white furniture, mostly because I didn't have any white furniture. And you know what else happened, y'all? Other people started reaching out to me. Neighbors from my old street who had seen me on the news, fellow teachers who remembered me from my working days, even strangers who heard my story and wanted to tell me about their own experiences with family members who made decisions without consulting them. I started speaking at senior centers and community groups about elder rights and the importance of staying involved in your own financial decisions. It wasn't something I'd ever planned to do, but it turned out I was pretty good at it. 38 years of teaching had given me skills I hadn't even realized I could use outside the classroom.
Mrs. Henderson, the lawyer said, I have to tell you, your case has been getting a lot of attention. The way you handled the media coverage, the way you spoke up about elder rights, it's inspired a lot of changes in how these cases are handled. What kind of changes? Several states are passing new laws requiring multiple family members to sign off on major financial decisions made under power of attorney. And there are new educational programs for families about the importance of including elderly relatives in decisions that affect their lives. Y'all, I had to sit down when I heard that. My worst day, my most humiliating experience had somehow turned into something that might help other people avoid the same situation. But the most important change wasn't in the laws or the programs or the recovered money. The most important change was in how my family saw me and how I saw myself. A year after I lost my house, David and Karen and I went back to visit the lot where it used to stand. They'd built a new house there, a modern one with lots of windows and a 2-car garage. It was nice, but it wasn't home. Home wasn't a place anymore. It was the knowledge that I could trust myself to handle whatever came next. Do you miss it? Karen asked as we stood on the sidewalk looking at the new house. I miss the memories, I said honestly. I miss the feeling of being settled somewhere, of having roots. But you know what I don't miss? What? I don't miss feeling invisible. I don't miss being treated like I'm too old or too fragile to handle the truth about my own life. I don't miss being someone who needs to be managed instead of someone who can manage herself. David reached over and squeezed my hand. Mom, I know I can never undo what I did, but I want you to know that I'm proud of how you handled everything. I'm proud of the woman you've become since all this happened. Honey, I said, squeezing back, I didn't become anyone new. I just remembered who I'd always been. And that's the truth, y'all. Sometimes it takes losing everything to remember that you're strong enough to build it back up again. Sometimes it takes having your trust betrayed to learn that you can trust yourself. And sometimes it takes being treated like you don't matter to discover that you absolutely do. I'm 73 years old now, living in my own apartment, volunteering 20 hours a week, and making my own decisions about everything from what to have for breakfast to where to spend my vacations. My house is gone, most of my savings are gone, and my relationship with my children will probably never be exactly the way it was before. But I'm not gone, sweetie. I'm still here, still learning, still growing, still proving every day that age doesn't make you invisible unless you let it. Don't turn on the TV, Mom, my daughter had said that day, trying to protect me from seeing my own house on the news. But you know what I learned? Sometimes you need to turn on the TV. Sometimes you need to see your own story being told, even if it's painful, even if it's not the story you would have chosen. Because, honey, if you don't tell your own story, someone else will tell it for you, and they might not get it right. I got it right, though. Finally, at 73 years old, I got my own story right. And that, y'all, is worth more than any house that was ever built.